Hello and welcome to iBuzz. I'm your host Nosheen Bukhari with yet another exciting episode from the entertainment world. Of course, it's Friday and I've got some movie recommendations for you as well, but first things first, let me quickly take you to the top stories. Ronan Keating and Jermaine Jenas join the One Show permanently. Reese Witherspoon shared her reflecting thoughts after watching Britney Spears' documentary. Jodie Turner-Smith on breaking barriers as a female Navy SEAL in Without Remorse and playing Anne Boleyn. Coldplay confirm arrival of new track Higher Power next week. And Game of Thrones prequel film shooting begins in Cornwall. And now moving to the top story of the day. After her breakthrough role in Queen and Slim, Jodie Turner-Smith is taking on her next major challenge, playing a military officer opposite Michael B. Jordan in Without Remorse, and a condemned queen in upcoming series Anne Boleyn. To discuss this further, we have David Wooldridge, who is a video events and radio presenter based in UK. David, welcome to the show.
Hiya, thanks for having me.
And then we have Jamie Lowe, who is a broadcast journalist and a podcast host. Jamie, welcome.
Good to see you again, Nosheen.
So, David, how do you see this character development, which is enormous? You know, from a female Navy SEAL to a condemned queen, two different movies having very different storylines, one actor, and you know, she's giving her best. Your thoughts on Jodie's versatility?
You know what? It's two very different roles, but two very similar characteristics. They're both two very powerful, passionate roles. And actually, Breaking Barriers is the way to describe both these roles, with the way that she portrays herself whilst showing two different disciplines. There's a constant narrative between the two.
Right. And Jamie, how do you see this coming?
I'd echo what David said there, but I think also it's important to see someone like Jodie, who's got this response from the potential audiences of these two pieces of media to be in a consistently, controversial role, giving a great performance, but also telling us something about the audiences with the response she's getting to both of those roles.
Right. And David, you have noticed that Tom Clancy's work is not very easy to depict. It's not very easy to, turn it into films. But there is a new trend, every other producer, every other filmmaker is opting to turn Tom Clancy's work into a film. So what are your expectations from this movie so far?
You know what? I think it's people like taking on Tom Clancy's work because it's always a challenge, isn't it? But it's also fun, and it's always going to start conversations like the one we're having today for Jodie as well. And I think that's the whole essence of the role, isn't it? Is that you're taking on something that isn't going to be easy. It is going to be a challenge, but you are going to reap the rewards from that, not only for your own personal self, which I'm sure Jodie is, but also from a talent perspective as well.
Right. And Jamie, what are your expectations? Do you think that justice will be done with Tom Clancy's work this time?
I hope so. And do you know what? Jodie's had a whirlwind few years. She's exploded onto the scene, next to Daniel Kaluuya in her very first film, Queen and Slim, and now taking on these two roles. And you've got to remember, she was actually, pregnant when she was filming the Jack Clancy film, Jack Clancy-inspired film. And, that affected how she did some of the stunts. So I was reading that, she couldn't use a rebreather for the underwater stunts. So she had to hold on to her breath.
And don't you think that this was stepping way too further than her capacity, being pregnant and then, getting trained as a Navy SEAL?
I think it tells us she's up for a challenge. And, we are just seeing the first female Navy SEALs anyway. I think they're very close to either passing out or maybe they've got there already. I'm unsure. But, this is, we are right on the nose with how history is developing right now. And let's face it, it probably isn't very easy to become a Navy SEAL. I definitely probably wouldn't make it through the training process. So fair play to Jodie for doing a bit whilst pregnant.
Right. So there's one thing that is felt a lot these days, especially when we talk about Netflix movies or movies being made in Hollywood in the name of diversity and change. Of course, they say that it has got nothing to do with the blackness of the actor or the character. But again, we see diversity being included in every other movie. So, David, what do you think? It is being overdone, or do you still think that it's being done because it is still necessary and we do see a lot of space, a lot of room, a lot of work to be done in order to, make diversity look more comfortable and normal?
Well, I mean, you can't get more diverse than a pregnant lady taking up army training, can you? Let's be honest about that. But no, I think there's a reason why we're seeing all these films, right? And, for me, I'm not bothered if someone's black, white, pink, purple. It doesn't bother me. But it's one of those where, there are barriers. And unfortunately, I'm not of that skin color to understand what that would be. But there is. Else we wouldn't be having this conversation now. But also, I think it's for the benefit of the media industry as a whole. You look at something like Hamilton, how successful that is. Yeah. And why can't Jodie be Anne Boleyn? Let's take a different take on it. I'm looking forward to watching it on Channel 5. I think it's a great step forward to allow that to happen. And I think that actually it is going to build new narratives from something that's been done again and again and again. We see things like The Crown and all types of programs that are built around royalists, let's say. But let's take a different take. Let's see what happens with it. Why not?
And Jamie, your thoughts?
Yeah, so, it's a 3-part series that's going to be airing on Channel 5, the Anne Boleyn series. So we're going to hopefully see a changing discourse, a discussion about Jodie's role. And that, she told the press that her casting, she feels like her casting has made people feel uncomfortable and upset. And I think that unfortunately tells us a lot about the British viewing public, or at least a portion of the vocal British viewing public. But, Anne Boleyn, in Jodie's estimation, was a polarising woman, and we're seeing that with her casting. But we are seeing, like David said, we are seeing, for one of the very few times, a black actor portraying a royal. So, and I'd echo what David said. I'm very excited to see a new take on aristocracy, because Anne Boleyn's story, it was sort of deeply built around misogyny. Henry VIII, I believe, was a very misogynistic character, and I sense that is partly also a slightly racist angle, but that's partly what's inspiring this response from a certain amount of the British viewing public.
Right. Jamie, my next question is a bit on the realistic grounds. We have seen diversity happening, in every other movie these days, but don't you think that the minority in every other movie is now being saturated, and at times it's overly done, which is going to, snatch work from potential white actors? What are your thoughts on this? Because we have been watching this happening lately. A lot of potential actors, they are, not involved in a cast only because they're white, and, filmmakers are trying to be a little more sensitive towards diversity. So do you think that it's going to affect the career of potential white actors?
Potentially, but so why does that matter? So what, that a white person has to work a little harder for a role? It's the general direction is a positive one where this is going. More diversity on the screen is what everybody should be demanding from Hollywood producers, British producers, indie filmmakers. That's where it needs to go. The idea that it's going to snatch role from white people is, I think that's a non-starter, because if anything, white people were snatching roles from diverse actors in the first place. So a leveling of the playing field can only be a good thing in my estimation.
Right. And David, what are your thoughts on this point?
I completely echo them, to be honest. I think that there's plenty enough work to go round. There's plenty of creative people in Hollywood. There's plenty of films, and there's plenty of theatre. to say that it's going to snatch roles from someone else, I think is, as Jamie said, a complete non-starter for this subject, to be honest.
Right. And what are your expectations from both the movies that are being created from production value?
I think with Anne Boleyn, I'm really looking forward to the production value of that, because let's face it, something like, I'll go back to The Crown again, that has set the bar for what is expected from some a kind of a media production of that genre. But then on the flip side, you look at something, the Tom Clancy's remake there, and with Michael B. Jordan alongside her as well. I mean, surely, in terms of production value, that's already, you just know what you're going to get from that. You're going to get action thriller, and you know it's going to be good.
Right. Yeah, and Jamie, what do you see coming from these two movies? What are your expectations?
So I'm going to sit down and watch the Jack Clancy film. Sorry, I forget the title. And I'm going to enjoy that. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have a thrill ride
Without
for
remorse,
an hour and a half. But with the Anne Boleyn series, I'm going to, I think, be watching closely to the response. I'm going to be very interested in how the public receive this TV show, and hopefully, I'm going to be. I believe I'm going to be. I'm going to be watching it, and I'm going to be feeling angry and very sad about the life that Anne Boleyn led because of Henry VIII. So I think that they're going to be two opposite ends of the spectrum, but I'll be interested to sit down and watch both of them all the way through, hopefully.
Right, so probably we're going to have to sit once again together for a review session once it's released.
Absolutely.
Right, okay. Jamie and David, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
That was Jamie Lowe and David Wooldridge sharing their thoughts on two very different characters by Jodie Turner. Now moving to the other story details of the day. Ronan Keating and Jermaine Jenis have been given permanent spots on the One Show sofa, officially being named Alex Jones co-hosts on the BBC program. Boyzone star Keating and former footballer Jenis have been among the stand-in hosts since Matt Baker left a year ago. Reese Witherspoon shared her reflecting thoughts after watching Britney Spears' documentary. She and Britney Spears ended marriages the same year and were raising two kids as single moms. Witherspoon said their treatment couldn't have been more different. The actress and lifestyle mogul said she was very aware that some women celebs like Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, and Paris Hilton were labeled bad, while those like her and Jennifer Garner were still good. Even though Witherspoon said there are still plenty of footages of her out there yelling at the cameras. The Big Little Lies star and producer talked to a magazine about the Framing Britney Spears documentary and how it highlighted for her the similarities between her and the pop star's lives some years ago. Coldplay have announced they'll return on May 7th with a new song called Higher Power. The new single was produced by Max Martin, who the band describes in a press release as true wonder of the universe. Coldplay have been teasing new music via the website alienradio.fm. The band's latest album, 2019 Everyday Life, was nominated for the 2021 Grammy Award for Album of the Year. Coldplay have announced that they'll return on May 7th with a new song called Higher Power, a new song single that was produced by Max Martin, whom the band described in a press release as true wonder of the universe. Coldplay have been teasing new music video via the website alienradio.fm. The band's latest album, 2019's Everyday Life, was nominated for the 2021 Grammy Award for Album of the Year. And Game of Thrones prequel film shooting begins in Cornwall. Crews were recently spotted on St. Michael's Mount building sets, erecting tents, and putting up film rigs. Photographs taken from a distance appear to show a medieval-style stone archway being built. Further up the county, near New Quay, locals spotted several Warner Brothers lighting and rigging lorries at Penhale Camp, Holywell. And we can already tell that the Game of Thrones fans cannot wait for this prequel. We will be right back after a quick short break. Stay tuned, don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Of course, it's Friday, and how can we forget the top 3 movie recommendations for you? We have 3 movies that have topped the list today. On number 1, we have Tim Burton's Batman. On number 2, it is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusades. And on number 3, we have 1994 blockbuster Leon the Professional. To have a detailed review discussion, we have Matt Capon, who is a senior video journalist and has worked in the London Evening Standard, The Independent, and the Daily Mirror. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So these top 3 favorite movies of 1990s and of course from 80s as well, they have been a major blockbuster who were way ahead of their time. And on top we have Tim Burton's Batman. How did you see this movie, and what are your thoughts on this movie? And tell us about the movie being way ahead of its time, including CGI, acting, and from other aspects. So Matt, tell us about your thoughts on Tim Burton's Batman. I mean, of course, it was way ahead of its time. That includes CGI, the acting, the production, and everything. How do you see this?
Oh, it was a game changer. Tim Burton's Batman was very much a film of my childhood. I remember being in school and actually lying in front of class saying that I'd seen it. I hadn't done, because they'd actually changed the film classifications to include 12 as a classification for children to be able to go and see it. It was phenomenal. It was so dark, it was gritty for its time, and it gave birth to the comic book movie genre. I absolutely loved it. The soundtrack, the acting, Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, it was phenomenal.
Yeah, and Tim Burton's version was very different than the other Batmans that we usually see.
Yes, it really was. I mean, before that, everybody associated Batman with Adam West and Burt Ward, that 60s camp TV show. So the idea that we could have a Batman movie, everybody was raising an eyebrow to, would it work? Would it not just be a recycling of a very cliched format? Far from it, in fact. It was phenomenal. Right.
Matt, what are your thoughts on the experimenting with the cast afterwards? I mean, previously we've been, observing that there was no compromise on the cast. I mean, they would always get the finest, the best actors for this character. But now there's a lot of, experimenting happening with the characters. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, Michael Keaton in Tim Burton's Batman was a phenomenal piece of casting, but everybody wondered why, because Michael Keaton beforehand was known for his comedic work. So Batman is a very gritty, a very dark, a very brooding character. And truth be told, to this day, Michael Keaton is widely regarded as the Batman. It's always been the character's portrayal has always really stood up amongst the subsequent actors that have followed, and actually is why Michael Keaton's been subsequently recast in the upcoming Flash movie.
Right, and do you think that from Michael Keaton to Robert Pattinson, the character could sustain itself up until now?
Yes, actually, I do. I think you have to remember that the characters of Batman and Superman have endured through different iterations and different versions. I think Robert Pattinson is going to bring a phenomenal approach to it. It's a very different approach to it that's relevant for its time, whereas Michael Keaton's portrayal was very much of its time as well. I think it'll be a very exciting time for Batman fans, if I'm being honest with you.
Right, and it was a 1989 blockbuster which had a very fast-paced CGIs, which can be considered as way ahead of their time. Do you think so?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. With any comic book movie, you have to have visuals that really bring you into the story, that bring you into the world. And I remember so many different elements of it, from the first time you saw the bat signal to the huge balloons that were going through Gotham City, down to Jack Nicholson's smile. The effects on it were just captivating for young children.
Okay, so our next recommendation is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So back in those days, this movie was taken again for kids. But then again, looking at it now, the opinions are changing. What are your thoughts on this movie?
The Indiana Jones films really are quite timeless and are a callback to the old serials of the 40s and 50s. The Last Crusade, again, is a real strong example of casting that works very much for its time. Harrison Ford's take on Indiana Jones speaks for itself. But for me, it's the casting of Sean Connery as his dad, Henry Jones Sr. And you get such a wonderful dynamic between the two of a very mischievous but a very informed and knowledgeable father in Henry Jones Sr. And how his son starts off pushing against his father in their relationship towards the end, being really quite close.
Right, and it's really sad that they've stopped making the Indiana Jones movies now.
It is, but with some characters, you do get to a point where you think, could another character actor portray Indiana Jones? I'd have to say no. I wasn't a fan of the Cave of the Crystal Skull, the fourth movie. I thought as a trilogy, The Last Crusade was a fantastic bookend to what was a really great set of films.
And do you think that it was... it actually spoke for the book? I mean, the way the movie was portrayed?
Yes, absolutely. It was a love letter to Steven Spielberg and George Lucas's childhood. The idea of this swashbuckling hero, this adventurer that goes into the middle of nowhere to uncover secrets and to uncover myths and legends and what lies behind them. I think it was a real tribute to the stories of its age.
On number 3, we have Leon the Professional, a 1994 blockbuster which came out with a very different kind of storyline, again, way ahead of its time. And when Natalie Portman was asked that if this movie could be made once again, she said probably no. How do you see this, and what are your thoughts on this movie?
Well, it hasn't. I agree with Natalie Portman. It's not a story that's aged very well in many respects. But for me, what really stands out in it, I mean, Gary Oldman is incredible in his role. His turn as the criminal mastermind that's also a police officer is just, it's such a sensational piece of acting. Jean Reno as Leon has this very innocent, he has an innocence to him, but also a very cold, calculating edge as the assassin. And the sequence at the start of the film with the classical music when Gary Oldman's henchmen murder Natalie Portman's family just takes your breath away and sets the tone for the rest of the film.
From production value, how do you see this? Do you think that there can be a part 2, which can be, you know, a sequel in these times, or it just did justice to the entire story and there shouldn't be any part 2 for this movie?
Well, it was always mooted that there would be a sequel where Natalie Portman's character has grown up and becomes an assassin herself. That's been discussed for a very long while now. And it would be interesting to see within today's world how that character would develop, understanding the backstory, what it meant to her upbringing. So there would be scope for it, I would have thought, with a clever piece of writing and positioning of her character. It wouldn't be impossible, but I think it would have to be done in a way that's very sensitive and self-aware of the story that came before. You can't dismiss the fact that it was a very uncomfortable story that led her to learning how to load a firearm.
Let's talk about the music. I mean, the music actually worked like, you know, for Sting, as in rising from the ashes once again, especially with the song Shape of My Heart. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, Sting is a master of reinvention as a musical artist, and Shape of My Heart really works so well with this with the story of Leon the Professional. It has resonance with the story arc of Jean Reno's character, but also if you were to do a bit more of a deep dive into the lyrics of it, it also does underline the very uncomfortable nature of the story. But I think I quite like that bittersweet idea of how Shape of My Heart is a very touching, a very tender song, but it also does underpin what's going on elsewhere in the characters' heads.
Right, right. Okay, Matt, out of these 3 movies, if you were given the right to award one of these, which one would you choose and tell us why?
It would be Batman. I don't even have to think about that. It would be Batman, hands down. And I love the other 2 films, but it would be Batman because Batman was the film that changed the industry. It changed popular perceptions of comic book heroes, of Batman. And it led to a change in how we view superheroes up on the big screen. I'd go so far as to say, without Tim Burton's Batman, there would be no Avengers.
Like, you do not compare Tim Burton's version to any other? I mean, is that your top favorite all the times?
Yes, absolutely, hands down. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It is very funny in parts, but equally, it is also very gritty, and there is a real sense of power to Tim Burton's Batman. Michael Keaton really portrays that split personality of he's more Batman than Bruce Wayne, and I love that. I think it's a great film. In fact, I'm going to watch it later. Right, and that's why we're discussing these movies, because it's weekend, and our viewers are anxious about the top recommendations. And also, about Tim Burton, it's that the more focus is on the story rather than action and drama. So that's what also makes his version stand out from the others. Yeah, absolutely. It's not about the set pieces, about the explosions, about the chases. It's about Gotham City. It's about the very dark, broken down nature of society within this story, and how Batman exists, how Batman works, and how he confronts the Joker. It's about that fantastic interplay between the hero and the villain. It's pure escapism in the best possible sense.
Right. And Matt, what are your thoughts on this major transition where now things are, becoming everything about Joker rather than Batman? I'm also referring to the recent movie Joker, and in previous versions we also saw that villains were more glorified than Batman himself. Are you a little angry with this sort of transition, or do you welcome it?
Oh, I welcome it. I think we've moved to a state now with the cinema-going public that the story of the villain or the anti-hero is something that's quite compelling and quite mysterious. We want to know more. What led someone to become the bad guy? And the Joker is one of those villains where you want to know what led him to have that horrible smile that hides a very villainous heart, a very dark, brooding, evil man. Yeah, it's such a compelling story. Everybody wants to know what goes on in the mind of a villain.
Matt, thank you very much indeed for your time and discussion.
Thanks a lot.
That was Matt Capon with the top 3 recommendations for you over the weekend. We hope you enjoyed it. And that is it from today's episode. We will be back next week with some more fun and entertainment. Until then, take care and goodbye.